Millionaire marries a pretend bride to please his ailing mother, but her one condition changes everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The story begins on a cold autumn morning in New York City. Golden leaves clung to the sidewalks, swept away by impatient winds, while in a penthouse office high above the city, Alexander Hartman sat motionless. He was the heir to a billion-dollar empire, a man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance. Yet today he felt powerless. His mother, Eleanor Hartman, lay frail in a hospital bed. Once the sharp, elegant matriarch of the Hartman dynasty, she now carried a single wish on her trembling lips: to see her only son married before she closed her eyes forever. Alexander had built a reputation on never bending to anyone's will, but this was his mother. The thought of denying her was unbearable. And yet, he was not ready for love. He had no fiancée, no secret lover hidden from the public eye, no woman he trusted enough to bring into his carefully constructed world. That was when the idea surfaced, dangerous and desperate. A pretend marriage. A bride chosen not for love, but for her willingness to play the role. A contract, clear and cold, that would guarantee appearances for his mother while protecting his heart and his fortune. But fate is never so simple. Across the city, in a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of soap and lavender, Emma Collins folded her apron after a long shift at the bakery. Her fingertips were dusted with flour, her wallet nearly empty, and her heart weighed down by bills piling up on the counter. She was ordinary in every sense, except for the quiet strength in her eyes. Life had taught her endurance, and she carried it like an invisible crown. When the opportunity came, it felt surreal. A stranger in a sharp suit knocked on her door, holding out a proposal that could change everything. Pose as the wife of Alexander Hartman for a few months, long enough to convince his mother that his life was settled. In exchange, Emma would receive enough money to pay off her debts and care for her younger sister's medical treatments. At first, Emma wanted to slam the door. The idea was absurd, a fairy tale twisted into something cold and contractual. But the thought of her sister's hospital bills pressed like a weight on her chest. She realized this might be the only lifeline she had. Still, she refused to surrender her dignity. Emma added one condition to the agreement. A condition Alexander had not expected. They would live together. They would play the part of husband and wife. But there would be no intimacy, no real affection allowed. The line between their worlds would remain unbroken. Alexander raised an eyebrow when she voiced it. He was used to negotiations, but this condition unsettled him. He agreed, telling himself it would keep things simple. Yet deep inside, a spark of irritation and intrigue flickered. Thus, the stage was set. A billionaire, with a dying mother's wish. A young woman with nothing but her pride. And a contract that promised to keep their hearts untouched. But as we all know, contracts can be rewritten by destiny. Emma Collins sat across from Alexander Hartman in his penthouse office, the city skyline stretching wide behind him like a silent audience. The ink on the contract was fresh, and her hands trembled slightly as she held the pen. The numbers written on those pages were life-changing, enough to wipe away debts and give her younger sister the treatments she desperately needed. Yet even as her heart pounded with relief, a heavier thought weighed on her. She was selling herself into a role she had never imagined someone's bride, even if only in name. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression composed, as though he had just signed off on another merger. "It is simple," he said, his voice even and assured. "We present ourselves as husband and wife. You will move into my residence. You will attend social functions at my side. My mother will see us together and find peace in believing that her son has finally settled down. When her condition improves, or when enough time has passed, we will dissolve the arrangement quietly." Emma swallowed hard, then met his gaze. "And what happens if the media starts asking questions? Or if your business partners notice something does not add up?" Alexander's lips curved in a faint, confident smile. "I am used to managing appearances. You will not have to worry about that." Emma hesitated. She looked down at the contract again. The neat lines, the legal language, the financial promise. She should have been grateful, yet something inside her resisted surrendering completely. She lifted her chin and spoke, steady this time. If I agree to this, it will be on one condition. There will be no intimacy. We will play the part. We will stand together. But there will be no crossing that line. I will not let myself become entangled in something false. For the first time that morning, Alexander's composed demeanor cracked. His eyebrows rose slightly, and his gaze sharpened. No intimacy? He repeated, as though testing the sound of it. Emma nodded, her jaw firm. That is my condition. I will wear the ring. I will move into your world. But there will be no confusion about what this island. It is a contract, nothing more. The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. Alexander studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. He was a man accustomed to negotiations, to striking deals that bent in his favor. Rarely did anyone place boundaries before him. And yet, here was this young woman, without wealth or power, holding her ground against him. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Very well, he said, his tone clipped. If that is what you need to feel secure, I will respect it. We will keep this arrangement precisely as you have described. Emma let out a slow breath, relief mingling with uncertainty. She had expected him to dismiss her, perhaps even withdraw the offer. But instead, he had agreed. That should have comforted her. Instead, it left her unsettled. Alexander signed the final page of the contract and slid the pen across to her. From this moment forward, he said, you are my wife. At least, that is what the world will believe. She forced her hand to steady as she signed her name beside his. The ink dried quickly, binding them together in a promise neither of them fully understood. When the papers were gathered and the silence grew heavy, Alexander stood. He retrieved a velvet box from his desk drawer and opened it. Inside lay a diamond ring, its surface catching the morning light. He took the ring and held it out to her. Emma stared at it, her chest tightening. It was beautiful, more valuable than anything she had ever touched. Yet it felt like a symbol of everything false between them. She slipped it onto her finger with careful precision, her eyes avoiding his. Alexander's gaze lingered on her hand. There, he said quietly. Now the world will see what it expects to see. Emma glanced at him then, her voice firm despite the weight in her chest. Remember our agreement. This ring is for appearances, nothing more. His jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod. I remember. The contract had been signed, the ring had been placed, and the line between them had been drawn. Neither of them realized that the very condition meant to keep them apart would soon be the force pulling them together. The first days of their new life together unfolded with awkward precision. Emma moved into the vast Hartman residence, a mansion perched on the edge of Central Park with marble floors that seemed to echo her every step. She had never seen ceilings so high or windows that stretched so wide, capturing the city skyline like framed portraits. To her, the house felt less like a home and more like a museum, every corner polished, every object in its perfect place. Alexander, on the other hand, moved through the space as though it were an extension of himself. He rose at dawn, dressed in tailored suits, and carried the air of authority even when pouring his morning coffee. He hardly spoke at breakfast, scanning business reports, while Emma sipped tea in silence. The contract had bound them together under one roof, but it had not erased the chasm between their worlds. That distance became sharper in the smallest of details. Emma preferred cooking her own meals, something warm and simple, like chicken soup or pancakes. The household staff offered to prepare anything she wanted, but she politely declined, tying an apron around her waist and working at the stove. Alexander once walked into the kitchen to find her stirring a pot of soup, steam curling around her face. He paused, surprised. No woman in his social circle had ever chosen to cook when staff were available. You do not have to do that, he said, his voice neutral. The staff can handle it. Emma looked over her shoulder. I know, but it makes me feel normal. It makes me feel like myself. Alexander said nothing more. Yet as he watched her ladle soup into a bowl, something shifted inside him. It was not glamorous, not staged, and yet it felt more genuine than the endless dinners he had attended in glittering restaurants. Their evenings were equally different. While Alexander buried himself in contracts and financial reports, Emma curled up in the library with a sketchbook, filling the pages with soft pencil drawings. Sometimes flowers, sometimes city streets, sometimes faces she had seen at the bakery. One night, when Alexander returned late from a meeting, he noticed the sketchbook lying open on the coffee table. On the page was a portrait of his mother, Eleanor, smiling gently, captured with more tenderness than any photograph had ever shown. He froze, staring at the drawing. "When did you see her?" he asked quietly. Emma looked up from her chair. "The day we met at the hospital. She was asleep. I drew her from memory." Alexander closed the sketchbook slowly, a shadow crossing his features. "You captured her better than most professional portraits. That is unusual." Emma shrugged lightly. "It is what I do when I want to remember someone." That night, he carried the sketchbook to his room, unsettled by the warmth that stirred in him. But despite those small moments, tension simmered. Social appearances became their battlefield. At Eleanor's bedside, Emma played the role of devoted wife with gentle grace, holding Alexander's hand as if it were natural. His mother's eyes lit up each time she saw them together, her frail fingers reaching out to touch Emma's face. "You make him whole," Eleanor whispered once, her voice thin but full of hope. Emma's chest tightened. She was deceiving this kind woman. Yet she could not bring herself to pull away. For Alexander, the sight of his mother's happiness was worth every false word, every staged smile. Outside the hospital, however, the world was less forgiving. Paparazzi captured photos of the couple walking together, and society pages speculated wildly about the mysterious bride. Some whispered she was after his fortune. Others insisted she was a hidden heiress. Emma ignored the tabloids, but she could not ignore the sharp looks she received at charity galas and dinner parties. One evening, as they stood in the glittering ballroom of a Manhattan hotel, Emma felt the sting of whispered conversations behind her back. Women in sequined gowns looked her up and down, their laughter cutting. Alexander noticed. Without hesitation, he slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close in a gesture that silenced the room. "She is my wife," he said clearly to an old business associate who had raised an eyebrow. "And she is everything I could have asked for." Emma's cheeks burned, her heart racing. It was all part of the act, she reminded herself. Just part of the contract. But as she leaned into his side, feeling the steady strength of his presence, a dangerous thought crept into her mind. What if it was not entirely an act? Neither of them spoke of it afterward. Yet that night, when Emma removed the diamond ring and placed it on the bedside table, her fingers lingered a little longer than before. It was late on a Sunday evening, when the fragile line between contract and reality began to blur. Rain tapped softly against the wide windows of the Hartman mansion, and the city lights flickered like restless stars. Emma had just finished cleaning up the kitchen after baking bread, the comforting scent still lingering in the air. She carried a small basket upstairs, intending to leave it for the household staff to distribute in the morning. Halfway down the hall, she stopped. Alexander's study door was ajar, and the light spilled faintly into the corridor. She pushed the door open quietly, only to find him slumped over his desk, his tie loosened, his hand resting against a stack of papers. The sharp lines of his usual composure had softened, replaced by exhaustion. His skin looked pale, and when she stepped closer, she realized he was burning with fever. "Alexander," she whispered, setting the basket down. She touched his forehead lightly, and the heat startled her. He stirred, his voice hoarse. "I am fine, just tired." "You are not fine," she said firmly. "You are sick." Before he could argue, Emma guided him up from the chair, slipping her arm under his to steady him. He resisted at first, but his strength faltered, and he allowed her to lead him to the sofa. She fetched a cool cloth and pressed it gently against his forehead, then hurried to the kitchen to make broth, her movements quick and purposeful. Alexander watched her when she returned, his eyes hazy yet focused. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Because someone has to," she replied. "You push yourself too hard. You cannot be strong all the time." Her words pierced deeper than she realized. Alexander had lived his life under pressure, always expected to be unshakable. Now, with Emma kneeling beside him, dabbing his forehead with a tenderness that expected nothing in return, he felt a vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to see. She spooned broth to his lips, patient and careful. He obeyed silently, watching her every movement. The contract said nothing about this. There was no clause requiring her to care for him when he was weak. Yet here she was, her presence steady, her eyes filled with quiet concern. Later that night, when the fever broke, Emma gathered the dishes and prepared to leave the room. But before she could step away, Alexander's voice stopped her. "Emma," he said softly, his tone stripped of all arrogance. "Thank you." She froze, then turned to him. The look in his eyes made her chest tighten. This was not the mask he wore at parties, nor the sharp businessman she had faced in the boardroom. This was a man stripped of his armor, acknowledging her in a way he had never done before. She offered a small smile. "Get some rest. You will need your strength." For the first time, he did not want her to walk away. He reached for the sketchbook that had been left on the side table, flipping to the page where she had drawn his mother. He held it out, his hand trembling slightly. "You see people differently," he murmured. "Even me." Emma's heart skipped. She wanted to deny it, to remind him that this was just an arrangement, but her words caught in her throat. Instead, she quietly said, "Maybe you just need someone to remind you that you are human." The silence between them grew charged, heavier than any contract clause could contain. For a moment, it felt dangerously real. His hand brushed hers as he returned the sketchbook, and the air shifted, a spark igniting in the stillness. Emma pulled back quickly, her pulse racing. She reminded herself of the condition, the line she had drawn. No intimacy, no entanglement. But as she left the study that night, her heart betrayed her with a truth she could not admit. The line was already beginning to blur. And for Alexander, lying awake long after she had gone, one thought consumed him. The woman he had married to fulfill an obligation was no longer just a figure in a contract. She was becoming something far more dangerous, something he feared, and yet something he could no longer resist. The fragile peace they had built did not last. As Alexander recovered from his fever, his business life pulled him back into its relentless rhythm. Meetings, contracts, and press events consumed his days. Emma, now accustomed to the mansion's vast quiet, focused on maintaining her role as the perfect wife in public. Yet beneath the surface, the line between acting and feeling blurred with every glance, every unspoken word. It was during one of Eleanor Hartman's hospital visits that the first crack appeared. A reporter, disguised as a hospital visitor, snapped photographs of Alexander and Emma holding hands by Eleanor's bedside. The next morning, tabloids exploded with headlines: "Hartman's mystery bride, true love, or elaborate charade." The photographs were plastered across glossy pages, dissected by commentators, and debated on television panels. Alexander's phone rang endlessly with calls from board members and partners demanding clarity. Emma watched from the side, her chest tightening as she heard the word scandal tossed around like a weapon. She knew what people were saying about her, that she was a gold digger, a nobody grasping at a billionaire's fortune. At a charity gala 2 nights later, the whispers became daggers. Emma stood beside Alexander in a silver gown, her hand resting lightly on his arm as flashes from cameras lit up the ballroom. But behind the sparkle, she caught snippets of conversations. "She came from nowhere. Look at her. She does not belong here. It will not last. She will take what she can and vanish." Emma clenched her jaw, trying to ignore the sting. But the final blow came when Alexander's former fiancée, a socialite named Victoria, approached with a glass of champagne in hand. Her smile was sharp, her tone dripping with poison. "How convenient, Alexander. You disappear for a year, and suddenly reappear with a wife no one has ever heard of. Tell me, Emma, how does it feel to step into a life that is not yours?" Emma froze, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on her. Alexander's arm tensed beneath her hand, his jaw tightening. He spoke through gritted teeth. "Victoria, that is enough." But Victoria only leaned closer, her voice low enough for Emma to hear. "Do not think you can keep up this act forever. Secrets have a way of surfacing." Emma excused herself quickly, her chest aching as she escaped to the balcony. Cool night air brushed her face, but it did not calm the storm within her. She felt like an intruder in a world that was not hers, playing a role she could never truly inhabit. When Alexander found her minutes later, his voice was stern. "Why did you walk away?" Her eyes flashed with hurt. "Because I cannot stand there and pretend it does not matter. You may be used to this, Alexander, but I am not. They see me as a fraud, and I cannot argue with them because it is true. This marriage is a lie." His eyes darkened. "You agreed to this. You knew the risks." "I agreed to help your mother," she shot back. "I agreed to the contract. But I did not agree to have my dignity torn apart in front of strangers." The air between them crackled with tension. Alexander's pride collided with Emma's pain, and neither would yield. In his frustration, he said words that cut deeper than he intended. "Maybe you should have thought about that before signing. You are the one who set the condition. No intimacy, no real connection. And now you blame me because you feel out of place?" Emma's breath caught, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "You think this is about me feeling out of place? I do not care about their wealth or their status, but I will not let myself be humiliated for a lie. I cannot do this anymore." With that, she pulled the diamond ring from her finger and pressed it into his hand. His expression faltered, but he said nothing as she walked past him, her gown trailing like a broken dream. By the time he turned to follow, she was gone. The contract that had once bound them now lay in pieces, torn apart, not by exposure, but by words spoken in anger. And for the first time since their arrangement began, Alexander felt the crushing weight of losing something that had become far more real than he was willing to admit. Emma left the gala that night without looking back. The city lights blurred through her tears as she rode the cab across Manhattan, the glittering skyline a cruel reminder of the world she was walking away from. By the time she reached her modest apartment, the diamond ring felt like a heavy ghost in her palm. She set it down on the table and stared at it, the sparkle mocking the hollowness inside her chest. For the next few days, she returned to her old life quietly. She tied her apron once more at the bakery, kneaded dough with flour-streaked hands, and pretended to be the same Emma she had always been. But nothing felt the same. Customers greeted her with warm smiles, her coworkers gossiped about trivial things, and her younger sister laughed over television shows at night. Yet Emma's mind kept drifting back to Alexander, to the sound of his voice, to the brief moments when the contract had felt like something more. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Alexander wrestled with the silence she had left behind. The mansion felt colder, the rooms emptier. His mother, Eleanor, noticed immediately. One afternoon, as Alexander sat by her bedside at the hospital, she reached for his hand with surprising strength. "She is gone, is she not?" Eleanor asked softly. Alexander's throat tightened. "She left because I failed her, because I let my pride speak louder than the truth." His mother studied him, her frail eyes sharp despite the weakness in her body. "Do you not see it, Alexander? That girl loved you in ways no contract could dictate. She saw past your money, past your power, and into the man you are when you are vulnerable. Do not let her walk away because you were too afraid to admit you need her." Her words struck him like a blow. He had thought himself immune to weakness, but he could not deny the emptiness Emma's absence had carved into him. The contract that had once seemed like control now lay like chains around his heart. That night, Alexander walked into his study and pulled out the contract they had both signed. He stared at the pages, the neat clauses, the ink that bound them. His fingers traced Emma's signature, delicate yet firm. What had begun as a performance had become the most real thing in his life. And now, because of his arrogance, it was gone. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. Enough was enough. The next morning, Alexander began his search. He canceled meetings, ignored calls from investors, and ordered his driver to take him across the city. He went to the bakery where she worked, but the owner shook his head. She took some time off, said she needed space. Frustration gnawed at him, but he refused to give up. He visited her apartment building, standing on the sidewalk for nearly an hour before realizing she would not return that day. He spoke with her neighbors who offered vague shrugs. She keeps to herself, quiet girl, kind. Everywhere he turned, the answer was the same. Emma had slipped away, leaving behind only fragments of her life. Late that evening, he returned to his mother's hospital room, worn and defeated. Eleanor looked at him knowingly. "You will not find her until you stop chasing her like a deal to be closed. You must show her that this is not about contracts or appearances. You must prove that your love is real, even if it costs you everything." Alexander bowed his head, his chest aching with the truth. For once, he did not feel like the billionaire who commanded empires. He felt like a man stripped bare, desperate for the woman who had seen him as more than his fortune. As he left the hospital, he passed a florist and paused. For the first time in years, he bought a bouquet himself. Simple lilies, Emma's favorite. It was a small gesture, but as he held the flowers in his hand, he realized it was not grand wealth that would win her back. It would be humility, sincerity, and the courage to stand before her with nothing but the truth. And with that thought burning in his chest, Alexander prepared to rewrite the story they had begun. This time not with ink on a contract, but with the only promise that truly mattered. 2 days later, Emma stood in the bakery early in the morning, rolling dough while the first light of dawn spilled through the windows. She had thought returning here would bring her peace, but instead, every moment carried the echo of Alexander's voice, the memory of his fevered whisper, the image of his eyes when he had thanked her. She shook her head and tried to focus on her work, unaware that outside, a Blacktown car had just pulled up to the curb. Alexander stepped out, dressed not in his usual tailored armor but in a simple shirt and dark coat. In his hand he carried the bouquet of lilies, their white petals trembling slightly in the morning air. For the first time in his life, he felt nervous walking through a door. The bell above the bakery chimed, and Emma looked up. Her breath caught when she saw him. The contrast was jarring. The billionaire standing in the small shop where she had always belonged. He crossed the floor slowly, every eye in the bakery following him. When he reached the counter, he placed the lilies in front of her. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice stripped of all pretense. "I came here not as Alexander Hartman the businessman, not as the man you signed a contract with, but as myself. I came here because I cannot let you walk away without knowing the truth." Emma's hands trembled against the counter. "What truth?" she asked softly. "That I was wrong," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "I thought this arrangement was about control, about appearances, but you broke through all of that. You cared for my mother when you did not have to. You cared for me when I was weak, and you did it without expecting anything in return. I let my pride ruin what we had, and I will not make that mistake again." The bakery had gone silent, customers frozen in place, but Alexander did not care. For once, the entire world could watch. He took the ring from his pocket, the same diamond she had pressed back into his hand at the gala. "I do not want this to be a contract anymore," he said, his voice steady. "I want this to be real. Emma Collins, will you give me another chance, not as my pretend bride, but as the woman I truly love?" Emma stared at him, her heart racing, the lilies between them filling the air with their delicate scent. The walls she had built around herself trembled. This was no act, no arrangement. This was a man laying down his pride before her. And though her lips quivered with hesitation, deep inside, she knew the story between them was far from over. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she stared at Alexander, the bakery silent except for the faint hum of the ovens behind her. Every customer watched, but in that moment, the world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of them. She wanted to believe him, yet fear still pressed against her chest. "Alexander," she whispered, "how can I trust that this is not just another performance? How do I know that when the cameras are gone, you will not walk away?" He stepped closer, his voice steady but full of urgency. "Because I am standing here, in front of strangers, risking every ounce of my reputation just to say this. I am not hiding behind contracts or wealth. I am here as a man who loves you, and I do not care who hears it." Gasps rippled through the bakery as his words echoed. He reached across the counter, taking her hand gently but firmly. "Emma, I cannot undo the pain I caused you, but I can promise that from this day forward, everything between us will be real. No conditions, no boundaries, just us." Her throat tightened as memories rushed back. His mother's frail smile when she held Emma's hand, his feverish gratitude when she cared for him, the way he defended her at the gala despite the whispers. Slowly, she realized his actions had already spoken louder than any contract ever could. Emma's lips trembled, but she nodded. "Then I will give you that chance." The bakery erupted in applause, strangers cheering as though they had all been waiting for this moment. Alexander slipped the diamond ring back onto her finger, but this time, it was no longer a symbol of a deal. It was a promise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he would never let go again. "From this day," he whispered against her hair, "you are not my pretend bride. You are my only love." And for the first time since their story began, Emma let herself believe it. Weeks later, the Hartman mansion no longer felt like a cold museum. Laughter echoed through the halls, the smell of Emma's cooking drifted from the kitchen, and Alexander found himself coming home earlier just to share a quiet dinner with her. What had once been a staged arrangement had transformed into something genuine, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. The most important moment came on a bright afternoon in the hospital. Eleanor Hartman sat upright in her bed, her strength returning little by little. Alexander and Emma entered hand in hand, no longer acting, no longer pretending. When Eleanor saw the sparkle of the ring on Emma's finger, her eyes filled with tears. "Is it real this time?" she asked softly. Alexander knelt beside his mother, his voice steady. "Yes, mother, it is real. She is the woman I love." Emma squeezed Eleanor's frail hand. "You gave me a family when I least expected it. I will spend my life honoring that gift." The older woman smiled, peace shining in her expression. "Then I can rest easy, knowing my son has found his true home." Later, as Alexander and Emma left the hospital, he stopped her on the steps, pulling her close beneath the golden light of sunset. "From a contract to forever," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. "I never believed love could be this simple or this strong." Emma smiled, her eyes shimmering. It was never about contracts or conditions. It was always about courage. The courage to be real. And as they walked forward together, hand in hand, the world finally saw them not as a billionaire and his pretend bride, but as two hearts bound by a love that no contract could ever define.